After 3 long years in his manshed, David Cameron's doorstopper of a memoir is at last upon us. For my money, I think it's been worth the wait, though I may not be giving it to every member of the family for Christmas. It's important that we hear his version of events, the inside story of his renegotiation with the EU and the campaign to keep this country in the bloc that ultimately failed, and his relationships with all the main actors. I tend to think that political memoirs often aren't worth the paper they are written on, and far too long and self-justifying. OK, it may be too much too late, but this is an overdue mea culpa that has melted my stone-cold heart just a little.
OK, well, most of it didn't melt my heart, the bit about his son Ivan. Obviously, it's heart-rending, terribly, terribly sad. However, for me, the rest of it, it reads like an apology to all his Remainer mates.
Doesn't apologise enough.
Well,
go on.
I think it reads like an apology to his Remainer pals. Like all Remainers in the political class, he's ashamed of the Brexit vote, and ergo, he's ashamed of the 17.4 million who voted Brexit. To me, this book is about him settling old scores, and he's using it to excuse his part in the chaos that is now happening. And you know, had he done his job properly as Prime Minister, had he squeezed more concessions out of the EU when he went over there and promised us that he would, we wouldn't have had the referendum in the first place. And I also think it's pretty low of a past Prime Minister who ran away from the challenge of Brexit to be trashing the current Prime Minister who is busting his guts to make it happen. And I think, you know, the talk about Boris and about Gove being disloyal to him is stupid. It wasn't about him. They did what they thought was best for this country.
Well, if you read the book, he thought Gove had said he would join the Remain side of Cabinet.
He said
and
he
therefore
thought Gove was disloyal to
blames
him.
Michael Gove for, as it were, radicalising Boris Johnson.
Yes.
And both of them radicalised the country and got them over the line, and we are where we are.
But he says it was disloyal.
Yeah, but Carole, we got lots to say on this.
So
Nick spent a lot of time with the former Prime Minister. So can I turn to Nick? Can I just, I mean, Churchill said, history is going to be kind to me because I intend to write it. Do you partly agree with Carole that he's having to revise history in order to flatter himself?
I agree with you, and yes, I did. I spent 45 minutes interviewing him and got in, and I think it's very good as someone that he regularly thrashes you at tennis, as he does one of your brothers.
We play together, actually.
No, and apparently Joe is the only one in your family who can play tennis. That's David Cameron's big identity. I think he comes out of it very well. I think what's interesting is if we come to the Michael Gove issue, as he told me, he wants to build the bridges. I'm surprised. I don't think he really knew Michael Gove that well, because I wasn't that surprised when it came to it that he actually wants to leave. But shouldn't we be celebrating the fact that something as crucial as that, politicians actually felt they could go with their heart rather than what they should be party loyalty? And that's what I think.
But
I think he emerges very well.
The sort of utility of the political memoir as a genre. How useful is it? Are they self-serving or otherwise? I know Greg's written one, but you're desperate to come in, Karen.
Well, I think that I admire the way that he has been so frank and reflective. He's blatantly said, I failed.
Yes.
And one of my favourite sayings is, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. And this book is full of the mistakes that he's made. And one of the biggest mistakes, by the way, that he's admitted to, which I've always said, Brexit would never have happened had it not been for your brother and Michael Gove going for leave. If that hadn't happened, if they hadn't let David Cameron down, then we would not be in the position we've been in for the last 3.5 years. And that is that's fact as far as I'm concerned.
Can I ask Greg something?
That's a good thing that we actually did, that we voted to leave. You're saying like it was the only option.
As the sage elder on this show, for this, on this edition anyway.
Not that much older than others.
You've written your own memoir. How useful is this to the historians of the future, or how partial is it?
Well, they're all partial. Anybody who writes an autobiography is partial. Of course. I mean, it's got to be. It's your explanation for why you did certain things. I don't think... I mean, I think it doesn't save him, really. I mean, history was... Just as Blair is now seen as about the Iraq War, he will be seen about the referendum. And actually, Sadly, some of the good things he did will be forgotten, just as some of the good things that Blair did will be forgotten, because they did something so dramatic. Yeah. There's an interesting, I mean, coming out now at this particular time, obviously it wasn't planned, it was planned it would come out after we'd left. It's quite interesting, Ed Vaizey, who was, you know, the arts minister, now an independent MP, one of the ones that was thrown out, but was an old Etonian like David, knew it and was there. Yeah, he's quite interesting to hear why what the account is at the moment.
I guess you could say that a vow of silence might be a better strategy, but he has kept quiet. But unfortunately, his memoirs are being published, so there's nothing he can do, really. People are going to want to interview him and talk to him, and they're inevitably going to ask about the current state of politics. Of course, he planned to publish his memoirs after Brexit was, in theory, going to be delivered in March. But they have, bizarrely, landed right in the middle of the biggest political turmoil we've seen yet.
I mean, I think that's it. I don't think he planned to be in the middle, to become such a central character. Of the interviews I've heard of him this week, I mean, what is interesting is George Osborne, who was really, A, pushing him not to do the referendum, 2, really pushing him to attack Boris Johnson and Gove. And he wouldn't do it.
And I want to ask you that, because one of the most interesting things that came out when I spoke with him is that he wishes he played dirtier. And they had cartoons where your brother's seen in Nigel Farage's pocket and he vetoed that, and he vetoed others like that. Do you think it should have been a dirtier fight from the Remain side?
I think it should have been a less... weirdly, it was not dirty, but it was only negative. And what I think how the Remain campaign failed was it never said, what has the EU done for us? It left everybody thinking the EU was just busybodies, they were trying to ratchet us towards federalism and so on and so on. The positives of the membership were never explored, and he never was a great advocate for that, and that, I think he failed.
Let's just talk about the biography as well. Let's not forget he did this for money. This was kind of a self-serving
Hold on,
thing.
he's giving his £800,000 to charity.
Well, that's not what I heard it was.
No, that is
it was anything over the advance was going to charity.
Well,
anything over
royalties
the advance.
are an urban myth, as anyone who's published
on my
knows.
book, I got a very nice advance and never saw
no royalty.
But let me just say that I was privileged to have interacted, worked with him, particularly to do with India, and I found him a really decent, really well-meaning and a really capable individual and a very good Prime Minister. It's just a shame that he will forever... Now, this is the other point. There's a tweet that he put out. There's a tweet that he put out where he said, for 3 years, I've kept relatively quiet about politics, but I think it's right former PMs write their memoirs to explain what they did and why. For the record is out on Thursday. So he did run away. Now, what would have happened if he'd stayed on? What would have happened if Boris had become Prime Minister then instead of Theresa May?
He didn't. Another Remainer did, who did exactly what he probably would have done, which would try to not make it happen. No, but you can't be Prime Minister of a country and then when the biggest challenge to hit your country comes, you run away from it, and then criticising the current Prime Minister for the way he's handling it, which is what he's doing.
In a dozen or so years, when the current Prime Minister writes his book, what's going to be the bombshell revelation in Bojo's book, Rachel?
Oh, dear, you'll have to pay me a lot of money. £800,000 in my back pocket, please, Nick.
Do you think he'll be remembered well by history? I don't. I think history will remember Cameron. I think he'll go down as a man who didn't know his party, didn't know his country, and didn't know his people.
I don't think that's fair.
We need to move on.
That might be true, but I don't think it's fair. I quite respected David
like him,
Cameron,
but I just
and I thought he did quite a good job on certain things. I think he just made a mistake on the referendum.
Which he owns up to.
And he's admitted to his mistakes, and I give him full credit for that.